Reed adjusted his tie for the third time, his fingers trembling slightly as he stood before the mirror in his childhood bedroom. The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting a warm glow on everything it touched. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of his life, his wedding day. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the butterflies in his stomach. "You've got this," he muttered to his reflection. "In a few hours, you'll be married to the woman of your dreams." The thought of Morgan waiting for him at the altar brought a smile to his face. They had been through so much together, and now they were finally taking Reed. Was really looking forward to seeing her walk down the aisle in her white dress. He was interrupted by a knock on the door. "Come in," he called. His mother poked her head in, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Oh, sweetheart, you look so handsome," she said, stepping into the room and smoothing down the lapels of his tuxedo. "I can't believe my little boy's getting married today." Reed chuckled, embracing her. "Thanks, Mom. I can hardly believe it myself." She pulled back, cupping his face in her hands. "Are you nervous a little?" he admitted, but mostly excited. "I can't wait to start this new chapter with Morgan." His mother smiled, patting him on his cheek. "You two are perfect for each other. Now come on downstairs. The guests are starting to arrive, and your father needs help setting up the last of the decorations." Reed followed her out of the room. His heart was racing with anticipation as he descended the stairs. He could hear the buzz of activity outside. The backyard of his parents' home had been transformed into a beautiful wedding venue. Rows of white chairs faced an arbor draped in flowers. He stepped outside and took in the scene. Caterers bustled about, setting up tables and arranging centerpieces. A wedding planner clipboard in hand, a group of workers directed the activity. Reed's father spotted him and waved him over. "There's my boy. Come help me with these lanterns, will you, for the next hour?" Reed threw himself into the last-minute preparations, grateful for the distraction from his nerves as he hung paper. Reed was busy putting out lanterns along the fence. He heard bits of conversation from guests arriving for the wedding. They were all saying how lovely the couple were, and how excited they were to see the bride. Reed felt a warm glow inside. He and Morgan had been together for 5 years, and everyone had been rooting for them to take this next step. At last, it was time for the ceremony to begin. Guests were arriving and filling the backyard. Reed went inside to finish getting ready. He was adjusting his boot when his sister Della appeared in the doorway. She looked oddly tense. "Hey, Del," he said, greeting her with a smile. "Everything okay?" Della hesitated. Then she stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "Reed, I need to talk to you about something." The serious tone in her voice made Reed's smile falter. Reed frowned, taking the envelope. "You went through her purse, Della? That's just open it." Della interrupted, her voice urgent with a sense of unease growing in the pit of his stomach. Reed opened the envelope and pulled out its contents. His heart stopped as he stared at the small plastic stick in his hand. The 2 pink lines were clearly visible. He whispered, looking up at Della in confusion, "We've been careful. We were planning on having kids right away." Dell's eyes were filled with sympathy. Reed looked at the date on the test. His gaze dropped back to the stick, and he felt the blood drain from his face as he noticed the date on the test was from 3 months ago. "This can't be right," he said, his mind reeling. "Morgan would have told me if she was pregnant. We tell each other everything." Della placed a hand on his arm. "I'm so sorry, Reed. I found it by accident when I was helping her with her makeup earlier. I thought you had a right to know before going ahead with the wedding." Reed's world tilted on its axis and he stumbled back, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "I don't understand." He stared at the test in his hand and asked, "Why wouldn't she tell me?" Della sat beside him, her arm around his shoulders. "I don't know. Reed, you need to talk to her. You can't go through with this wedding until you know the truth." Reed nodded numbly. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion and hurt. He stood up, his legs unsteady. "I need to find her," he said. "She's in the guest room getting ready," Della said softly. "Do you want me to come with you?" Reed shook his head. "No, I need to do this alone." He made his way down the hall, his feet feeling heavy. The sounds of laughter and excitement from outside seemed distant now, muffled by the roaring in his ears. When he reached the guest room door, he paused, took a deep breath, and knocked. "Come in," Morgan's voice called out. "Happy." Reed's hand was shaking as he turned the doorknob. He stepped into the room and immediately spotted Morgan. She was standing in front of a full-length mirror, looking radiant in her white gown and with her dark hair cascading down her back in soft curls. She turned at his entrance and her face lit up. You're not supposed to see me before the ceremony, she said. Me before the ceremony, it's bad luck. But her smile faded as she took in his expression. What's wrong? Reed held up the pregnancy test, his voice barely above a whisper. Is there something you want to tell me, Morgan? The color drained from Morgan's face. She stumbled back. Her hand flew to her mouth. Where did it come from? You got that. Does it matter? Reed's voice grew stronger, anger beginning to seep through the shock. What matters is that you're pregnant and you didn't tell me why. Why didn't you tell me? Morgan's eyes filled with tears. Reed, I can explain, he demanded, his fists clenching at his sides. Morgan, please explain why my fiancée, the woman I'm supposed to marry in less than an hour, has been keeping this massive secret from me. Morgan sank onto the bed, her wedding dress pooling around her. You'd react, Reed. His jaw clenched. So he thought it was better to tell me. Morgan, we're supposed to be partners. We're supposed to face everything together. I know, Morgan. Sob, mascara streaking down her cheeks. I was going to tell you. I swear. I just wanted to wait until after the wedding. I didn't want to complicate things even more. Reed laughed bitterly. Morgan, you're pregnant. That's not something you just spring on someone after you've said I do. He paced the room, running a hand through his hair. I don't understand. We've always been honest with each other. Why start lying now? Morgan stood up, reaching. Reed, please, I'm sorry. I know I should have told you sooner, but we can work through this. We love each other, this baby. It's just happening a little sooner than we planned. That's all. Reed stepped back, avoiding her touch. Something in her words, in the desperation of her tone, made him pause. A terrible suspicion began to form in his mind. Morgan, you said you got pregnant when? She paused, her eyes widening. What do you mean? I mean, Reed said, his voice calm but with an edge, that we've always been careful. We use protection, so I'm asking you, when and how did this happen? Morgan was silent, and he could feel the tension in the room. Morgan wrapped her arms around herself, avoiding his gaze. Reed pressed his heart, pounding with anticipation. Is this baby mine? The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Morgan looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears. I'm so sorry, she said. Reed staggered back, feeling as if he'd been punched. Morgan rushed towards him, grabbing his hands. It was a mistake, Reed. I love you, only you. Please, we can work through this. We can raise this baby together. No one has to know. Ray yanked his hands away, feeling disgust and anger roiling in his stomach. Are you serious? You want me to pretend to be the father of a child that isn't mine? Live a lie? I'm sorry, Morgan. I made a terrible mistake, but I love you. We can get past this. Please don't throw away everything we have. Reed stared at her. This woman he thought he knew better than anyone else. Now she was a stranger to him. He asked, his voice hollow, how long this had been going on. Morgan hesitated, then whispered. It was just one time. 3 months ago, I was drunk and stupid. I'm sorry, but I can't bear hearing the details. I don't want to know anymore. He turned away from her, his mind reeling. Outside, the guests were chatting, and the music was starting up. They were all out there waiting to see a union built on love and trust. What was all a lie? Ree's voice was small and frightened. What are you going to do? He turned back to her, his decision made. I'm calling off the wedding. Morgan's face crumpled. Reed, please, we can work this out. I'll do anything. Please don't do this. But Reed was already moving towards the door. It's over, Morgan. I can't marry you. I can't pretend that this didn't happen. As he reached for the doorknob, it suddenly swung open. Wade and Irene, Morgan's parents, burst into the room. Wade was furious. What the hell is going on here? He demanded, glancing between Reed and his sobbing daughter. Why aren't you two at the altar? Irene rushed to Morgan's side, pulling her into an embrace. Sweetheart, what's wrong? What's happened? Reed stood tall, facing Morgan's parents. I'm calling off the wedding. Reed announced the wedding was off. Despite the turmoil inside him, his voice was steady. He told Wade and Irene that he was sorry for the inconvenience. But he couldn't go through with it. Wade's face turned an alarming shade of red. He demanded to know why Reed was calling it off. Reed told him that he had no idea how much money they'd spent on the wedding. He said that Wade was humiliating him. You're humiliating your daughter, Reed repeated, incredulously. Your daughter has been lying to me for months. She's pregnant, and the baby isn't mine. A heavy silence fell over the room. Wade and Irene exchanged a look that made Reed's blood run cold. He realized, his voice barely above a whisper, "You both knew." Irene stepped forward. "Let's all calm down and discuss this rationally. What's done is done. The important thing now is to move forward and think about the future." Reed interrupted, his anger surging through him. "The future is where I'll raise another man's child and pretend it's—" Wade's expression turned serious. "Listen here, boy. We've invested a lot in this wedding. You can't just walk away from that. Think about Morgan's reputation and our family standing in the community." Reed was taken aback. Hearing this, Reed realized that this was about saving face and protecting his reputation. He looked at Morgan, who was still crying in her mother's arms. "Did you ever love me? Or was I just a convenient solution to your problem?" Morgan reached out to him, her voice pleading, "Reed, please, I do love you. We can make this work. I promise." But Reed had heard enough. He stepped back, his hand on the doorknob. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this. The wedding is off." He turned to leave. Wade grabbed his arm. "You can't do this, Reed. Think about the consequences. If you walk out that door, we'll make sure everyone knows it was your fault. We'll tell them. You got cold feet and left our daughter at the ice altar. Your reputation will be ruined." Reed wrenched his arm free, and a bitter laugh escaped him. "My reputation? You're worried about my reputation when your daughter's been lying and cheating, and you've been complicit in this whole charade." He looked at each of them in turn. Wade's angry face, Irene's pleading eyes, Morgan's tear-stained cheeks. These people, who he had thought would become his family, now felt like strangers. "I'm done," Reed said firmly. "The wedding is off and that's final. I won't be blackmailed into a marriage based on lies." With that, he walked out of the room. He ignored the protests and threats behind him as he made his way down the stairs. He could hear the commotion starting, Morgan's sobs echoing through the house. Reed stepped outside, blinking in the bright sunlight. The guests turned to look at him, expectant smiles on their faces. But there would be no wedding today. There would be no happily ever after, as the reality of what had just happened sank in. Reed felt a strange mix of pain and relief. He had lost the future he had imagined, but he had also dodged a bullet. He had stood up for himself and refused to be manipulated. Now he just had to figure out how to tell everyone. Reed stood on the porch, reeling from the confrontation he'd just had with Morgan and her parents. The weight of their betrayal pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. He could hear the excited chatter of guests, oblivious to the drama inside the house is getting pretty intense. How is he going to break the news to everyone that the wedding is off, before he's had a chance to decide on a course of action? The front door suddenly bursts open, and Wade storms out. He's got a pretty angry look on his face, shouting, "You ungrateful little bastard!" He grabs Reed by the collar of his tuxedo and yells, "Do you have any idea what—" "You're doing the wrong thing, Reed," he said, pushing Wade's hands away. His own anger was rising to match the older man's. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm refusing to be part of your family's lives." Irene appeared in the doorway, her voice shrill with panic. "Please, both of you, keep your voices down. The guests will hear." Reed's eyes narrowed as he felt Wade's finger jab into his chest. "Listen here, boy. We spent a fortune on this wedding, so you can't just walk away." Reed turned to address the gathered guests, but Wade grabbed his arm and yanked him back. "If you say one word about why you're really calling this off, I'll make sure everyone in this town knows. You know what a coward you are," he hissed. "I'll tell them you got cold feet and left my little girl at the altar." Reed wrenched his arm free, disgust twisting his features. "Are you seriously trying to blackmail me into marrying your cheating daughters?" "It's not blackmail," Irene interjected, her voice low and urgent. "We're trying to protect everyone here. Think about it, Reed. If you go through with the wedding, everyone wins. You get the wife you love, we save face, and the baby has a proper family." Reed couldn't believe what he was hearing. He looked between Wade and Irene. These people he had once respected now revealed as manipulators. "Willing to sacrifice his future for their own agenda," Reed repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He was talking about the wife he loved. Then he said, "The wife who cheated on me and lied about it for months. The wife who was willing to trick me into raising another man's child." Wade's eyes darted nervously to the guests, some of whom were starting to take notice of the tense conversation on the porch. "If you want to keep the peace, keep your voice down. We can talk this through like adults." Reed laughed bitterly. "There's nothing civil about what you're suggesting." Do I have to live a lie and pretend everything's fine when my entire world has just been shattered? Irene reached out. Reaching out, she placed a hand on Reed's arm. We know this is a shock, but Morgan loves you. She made a mistake, yes, but we've all done that at one point or another. You could learn to forgive her. Reed shook off her touch and took a step back. Forgive her for lying to me every day for months, for being willing to let me believe her child was mine. Wade's expression hardened. Listen to me, you little ingrate. If you walk away now, you'll regret it. We'll make sure everyone knows it was your fault. Your reputation in this town will be ruined. My reputation. Rose, you're worried about your reputation is on the line here. Your daughter has been lying and cheating, and you've been complicit in this whole charade. A hush fell over the gathered guests' heads turned. The whisperers started. Reed could see the shock and confusion on their faces, but he was beyond caring. You want to know why the wedding is off? He called out. Reed turned to the crowd. Morgan suddenly appeared in the doorway, still in her wedding dress, with mascara streaking her cheeks. Please, Reed, don't do this. We can work it out, she begged. Despite his anger, Reed felt a pang of distress at the sight of her distress. What do you want, Morgan? He asked. You cheated on me. You're pregnant with another man's child. You were willing to let me believe it was mine. The crowd gasped. Morgan's face crumpled. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you, but you did, Reed said, his voice breaking. You hurt me in the worst possible way. How could you do this, Morgan? How could you lie to me for months? Morgan took a step towards him, her hand outstretched. I was scared, she whispered. I didn't want to lose you. I love you, Reed. We can get past this. I know we can, Reed replied, shaking his head and taking another step back. No, Morgan. We can't go back now. It's too late. You destroyed it the moment you decided to lie to me. Wade saw his plans crumbling before his eyes and made one last desperate attempt. He called out to the guests. This is all just a misunderstanding. It was a mistake. We all know how it is. Let's just move on. He spoke up suddenly, cutting off the speech he was making. He turned to the crowd and said, I'm sorry, everyone. I'm sorry to all of you who came here today expecting a wedding. I can't go through with it. I've just learned that my fiancée has been unfaithful. She's pregnant with another man's child, and she and her parents were willing to trick me into raising that kid as my own. The silence that followed was deafening. Then slowly the murmurs began, shock, disbelief, and sympathy. I could see it on the faces of the guests. Reed's parents pushed through the crowd, confusion etched on their features. His father said, placing a hand on Reed's shoulder, What's going on? Reed looked at his parents, and you could see the pain in his eyes. I'm sorry, Mom and Dad, but there's not going to be a wedding today or ever. His mother's eyes filled with tears. Oh, sweetheart, she murmured, pulling him into a hug as Reed embraced her. He could hear Wade and Irene frantically trying to do damage control. They tried to calm down, but it was too late. The truth was out. Reed gently broke away from his mother's arms. I need some time alone, he said quietly. I'm sorry for all of this. With that, he walked down the porch steps and through the parting crowd. He could hear Morgan called his name, but he could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him. He kept walking, his feet carrying him away from the life he thought he was going to have. As he reached the street, Reed heard hurried footsteps behind him. He turned to see his best man, Jake, jogging to catch up. Wait up, Jake called out, his face showing concern. Are you okay? What on earth happened back there? Reed stopped, running a hand through his hair. I'm not okay, Jake. Not even close. Out the woman was about to marry has been lying to me for months. She's pregnant, Jake, and it's not mine. Jake's eyes widened in shock. Holy shit, Reed. I don't even know what to say. That's up. Yeah, Reed agreed. His voice was hollow. The best part? Her parents knew. They were all willing to let me marry her without knowing the truth. They were going to let me raise another man's child thinking it was mine. Jake shook his head in disbelief. That's messed up. I'm sorry. What are you going to do now? Reed shrugged, feeling lost. I don't know. I can't go back there. I can't face all those people. Their pity, their questions. I just need to get away. Jake nodded, understanding in his eyes. All right, here's what we're going to do. My car is just down the street. I'm going to drive you to my place. You can crash there. Clear your head deal, Reed thought, feeling grateful. Thanks, Jake. I appreciate it. As they walked to Jake's car, Reed could hear the commotion from the house growing louder. He didn't look back. He couldn't bear to see the chaos he'd left in his wake. Right now, he just needed to escape. The drive to Jake's apartment was silent. Reed was lost in his thoughts, and Jake respected his need for quiet. When they arrived, Jake led Reed inside and straight to the couch. Jay went to the kitchen and returned moments later with 2 beers, handing one to Reed. I know it's early, but I think you could use this, he said. Reed accepted the beer gratefully and took a long swig. The cold liquid helped ground him and bring him back to the present moment. Jake settled into an armchair across from Reed. All right, man, talk to me, get it all out. And so Reed did. He poured out the whole story, finding the pregnancy test, confronting Morgan, the revelation of her infidelity and her parents' attempts to pressure him into going through with the wedding. Jake listened silently, his expression growing darker with each new detail. When Reed finished, Jake let out a low whistle. That's some seriously twisted, Reed. I can't believe Morgan would do that to you. And her parents. That's a whole new level of crazy, Reed. He nodded, taking another sip of his beer. I keep replaying everything in my head, trying to see if there were signs I missed. How could I have been so blind? Jake leaned forward, his expression serious. Don't do that to yourself, man. This isn't your fault. Morgan's the one who cheated. She's the one who lied. You didn't do anything wrong. Reed appreciated Jake's words, but they did little to ease the ache in his chest. The words didn't help much. I just thought I knew her. Jake, I thought we had something real. How am I supposed to trust anyone after this? Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, man, but I do know this. You're better off finding out now than after you're married. It sucks and it hurts like hell, but you dodged a bullet. Reed nodded slowly, knowing Jake was right, but the knowledge didn't help much with the pain of betrayal. I guess it's everything I thought my life was going to be. It's all gone in the span of a few hours. My whole future just disappeared. Jake stood up and moved to sit next to Reed on the couch. He placed a hand on Reed's shoulder. His grip was firm and reassuring. I know it feels that way now, but this isn't the end. It's a setback. You'll get through this, and you'll be stronger for it. Reed smiled weakly, grateful for his friend's support. Thanks, Jake. I don't know what I'd do without you. Reed opened the message on his phone. His blood ran cold as he read its contents. Everything okay? Jake asked, noticing Reed's sudden tension. Reed handed him the phone. His voice tight, he said, It's from Wade. He's demanding that I pay them back for all the wedding expenses. He says if I don't, he'll make sure everyone in town knows I left Morgan at the altar. Jake's eyes widened as he read the message. What, is he serious? After everything they did, Reed stood up, anger coursing through him. Apparently they're trying to pin this all on me. Jake jumped to his feet, his expression a mix of fear and defiance. No way. We're not letting them get away with this. They can't just lie and manipulate you and then try to blackmail you on top of it all. Reed paced the room, his mind racing. What am I supposed to do? Jake asked. If I don't pay, they'll... My name is all over town, but if I do pay, it's like I'm admitting guilt. Like I'm the one who did something wrong. Jake shook his head vigorously. No, absolutely not. You're not paying him a cent. In fact, he trailed off, a gleam in his eye. Reed recognized that look. It usually preceded one of Jake's more outlandish ideas. What are you thinking? Jake grinned, a hint of mischief in his expression. I'm thinking it's time we turned the tables on them. They want to play dirty, fine, but they picked the wrong guy to mess with. Reed raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite his turmoil. What exactly did you have in mind? Jake's grin widened. Well, my friend, I think it's time we did a little digging of our own. If Mort was willing to cheat on you, who's to say this is the first time? And if her parents were so quick to cover it up, it makes you wonder what other secrets they might have. Don't they have more skeletons in their closet? Reed hesitated, torn between his desire for justice and his natural inclination to take the high road. Jake, you're going too far. This isn't about stooping to their level. It's about protecting yourself. They're trying to ruin your reputation to bully you into silence. Are you really going to let them get away with that? He thought about it for a long moment, considering the betrayal by Morgan, the manipulation by Wade and Irene, and the future he'd lost. He nodded, his resolve hardening. You're right, he said, his voice steady. I'm not going to let them get away with this. Jake clapped him on the shoulder. First things first, he said. his eyes glinting with determination. First, we need to gather intel. I've got a contact who works at the country club where Wade's always talking about his business deals. I bet he's heard some interesting things. Reed nodded, feeling a surge of energy for the first time since discovering Morgan's betrayal. He felt like he was taking control of the situation. Okay, what else? Jake ticked off points on his fingers. We'll need to look into a Morgan past. Boyfriends, college roommates, anyone who might have some dirt on her. And of course, Irene's always posting on social media about their perfect family life. I bet if we look closely enough, we'll find some cracks in that facade. That's what Jake outlined in his plan. Reed felt a mix of emotions. Part of him was apprehensive about taking such an aggressive approach, but another part, the part that was raw with pain and anger, relished the idea of fighting. I'm back all right, Reed said finally, his jaw set with determination. Let's do this. They want to play hardball? We'll show them what that really means. Jake grinned and slapped Reed on the back. That's the spear, man. They mess with the wrong guy. By the time we're done, they'll wish they'd never tried to cross you. As they began to plan their next moves, Reed felt a strange sense of calm settling over him. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it was. He had a dull ache in his chest, but now it was tempered by a fierce determination. He would not be a victim in this story. He would not let Morgan and her family dictate the narrative. With each passing moment, his resolve strengthened. He would take control of his own story. If Wade and Irene wanted a war, they were about to learn that they picked the wrong man to battle. Reed stood at the back of the crowded reception hall. His heart was racing as he stepped forward to address the guests. They had gathered expecting a joyous wedding celebration, but now sat in intense silence, waiting for an explanation at the front of the room. Morgan stood trembling, her white dress a stark contrast to the tears streaming down her face. Wade and Irene hovered nearby, their expressions a mix of anger and panic. Reed took a deep breath and stepped forward. The soft murmur of conversation died away as all eyes turned to him. All eyes turned to him. He cleared his throat and began to speak. I want to thank you all for coming today, he said, his gaze sweeping across the room. I know you were expecting a wedding, but I'm afraid I have some news that might come as a shock to many of you. Wade stepped forward, his face red with barely contained fury. He heard the truth and turned back to the crowd. The reason there won't be a wedding today is because I recently discovered that Morgan has been unfaithful. There was a collective gasp and Morgan let out a choked sob, burying her face in her hands. Reed continued, his voice growing stronger. Not only that, but she's pregnant and the child isn't mine. The room erupted in shocked whispers and exclamations. Reed could see the mixture of pity and disbelief on the faces of his friends and family. Please, Reed, Morgan pleaded, her voice barely audible above the commotion. Can we talk about this privately? Reed shook his head, his expression hardening. No, Morgan, I think we've had enough secrets. Don't you think so? He turned back to the stunned audience. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part is that Morgan's parents knew about this deception. They were willing to let me marry their daughter and raise another man's child as my own, all to protect their precious reputation. Wade lunged forward, his face contorted with rage. You little bastard, he growled. How dare you? Jake, who had been standing quietly at Reed's side, stepped between them. Back off, old man, he said, unless you want to add a lot to your list of sins today. Irene. She rushed to her husband's side and grabbed his arm. Please don't make this worse, she hissed. Reed looked at them, disgust evident in his eyes. I almost feel sorry for you. You're so concerned with appearances that you're willing to sacrifice your daughter's happiness and my future. It's pathetic, really. He addressed the crowd once more. I'm sorry to have to share this, but I wanted you all to know the truth. I couldn't go through with this wedding knowing what I know now, and I refused to be bullied or blackmailed. The room was silent for a moment. Then slowly people began to stand. Reed's parents were the first to approach him, embracing him in a tight hug. His mother gave him a tight hug and said, Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. His father's grip on his shoulder tightened, and he said, You did the right thing, son. We're proud of you. As more people came forward to offer their support, I could see Wade and Irene frantically trying to do damage control, but it was too late. The truth was out, and there was Morgan pushed through the crowd. Mascara streaked down her cheeks as she sobbed. Please, can we just talk about this? I know I made a mistake, but I love you. We can work this out. Reed looked at her, the the woman he had thought he would spend the rest of his life with. He felt a pang of sadness, but it was overshadowed by a sense of relief. "Oh, Morgan," he said softly, "we can't. We've already lost it. You destroyed it the moment you decided to lie to me." Morgan's face crumpled, but then he asked, "What about the baby? What am I supposed to do now?" In her mother's arms, Reed felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Jake, a proud grin on his face. "You did good, man. You stood up for yourself and didn't let them push you around." Reed nodded, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. "Thanks, Jake, for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." Jake clapped him on the back. "That's what friends are for. What friends are for now. What do you say we get out of here? I think you've had enough drama for one day." Reed couldn't help but laugh. "Yeah, I think you're right. Let's go." As they made their way towards the exit, Reed could hear the buzz of conversation behind him. He knew there would be gossip, questions, and probably some judgment. But he knew he'd done the right thing. He'd stood up for himself, refused to be manipulated, and exposed the truth. Outside, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the parking lot. Reed took a deep breath, feeling like he could finally breathe again. Jake jingled his car keys. "Where to? I could grab a beer, or maybe hit up a bar and find you." Reed shook his head and smiled. "I think I just want to go home and think about everything you said." Jake nodded, understanding. "Fair enough. You've been through a lot today. Just remember I'm here if you need anything, day or night." "Thanks, man," Reed said, gratitude evident in his voice. "I appreciate it." Reed stood for a moment watching the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the horizon. He felt different, lighter somehow. The pain of betrayal was still there, a dull ache in his chest, but it was overshadowed by a sense of pride. He had faced one of the worst moments of his life head-on, and he had come out stronger. He wasn't really sure where he was going, but he knew he needed to move on. He thought about the future. The future he had planned with Morgan was gone, but in its place was possibility. He thought about Morgan and the life growing inside her, a part of him, for what might have been, but he knew he'd dodged a bullet. A life built on lies and deception was no life at all. As he rounded a corner, Reed found himself in front of the park where he and Morgan had shared their first kiss. He paused, memories washing over him. Instead of the pain he expected, he felt a sense of closure. "Goodbye, Morgan," he said quietly to the empty park. "I hope you find what you're looking for." Reed turned and started walking home. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in hours, he felt hope. He had survived the worst day of his life. He had stood up for himself, refused to be manipulated, and come out the other side. Reed made a promise to himself that he would learn from this experience, but he wouldn't let it define him. He would move forward stronger and wiser, and when he was ready, he would open his heart again, but this time he would do it with eyes wide open. The night air was cool on his face as Reed finally reached his apartment building, and he paused. As he stood at the entrance, looking up at the stars twinkling in the dark sky, a sense of peace washed over him. New beginnings, he thought to himself, with a small smile playing on his lips. With that, Reed stepped inside, ready to face whatever came next. The wedding day that wasn't had ended, but his story was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning.